Hey guys, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing amazing and fantastic and wonderful. Hello everyone who has come over from Lisa's channel where she read chapter 1. I'll put it right up here. It will be linked down below as well. So excited to be reading Checked Out by Elizabeth Span Craig. This is the first in the Village Library Mystery Series. I am going to be reading chapter 2 to you all, and I hope that you enjoy it. So, for a second I stared at him, frozen. Then I rushed forward to make sure Roger wasn't still breathing and needed help. Finding no pulse and seeing that his eyes were open and unfocused, I took a deep breath, found my phone with shaking hands, and called the police as I carefully made my way back to the front yard again. What must have been 2 minutes later, I could already hear a distant siren, then another, and then another. In a town like Whitby, emergency personnel didn't have as much to do on a regular basis, and then all showed up in concert for a big event like this. Another couple of minutes later, a police car, an ambulance, and a fire truck pulled up in front of the house, sirens wailing and lights flashing. And seconds after they arrived, every neighbor on the street was standing in their front yard, anxiously staring at the commotion. If I'd had any illusions that my blind date was going to be kept under wraps, they were now completely shattered. I pointed to the side of the house as the policeman jogged toward me. "Around the back," I said, deciding not to tell him there was no need to run. I shivered and then felt my legs go a little wobbly. One of the medics noticed. "Sit down," he said firmly as he disappeared around the corner of the house. I did as I was told. The tension of the blind date, coupled with the shock of the discovery, made me a lot more unsteady than I'd have thought. Working with the police as I did, I definitely had my experience in dealing with people who were ill, and I'd considered myself someone who wasn't easy to faze. Apparently, though, this did not extend to finding dates murdered. I sat on the curb as the first responders did their work in the back. I saw their pace slow as they realized it wasn't an emergency, and their tone of voice was grim. A minute later, one of the medics came to check on me. "I'm fine," I said, feeling a little embarrassed. "I was just woozy for a second or two." The medic left me to return to the backyard. Firemen were left a few minutes later, and I waited for the policeman to speak to me. He was the chief, as I recalled. I tried to remember what I knew about him, including his name. He'd only been on the job for the last month and had moved here from another state, according to a story I'd read in the paper. He was a big, middle-aged man, tall and solid with a steady gaze and a receding hairline. I remembered when he'd moved in, he'd hosted Coffee with a Cop as an opportunity to meet members of the community and to find out their thoughts on the town and safety issues. I thought it was a smart move, considering small towns can be insular, and it can be tough to meet people as something of an outsider. A few minutes later, he reappeared looking serious. Spotting me sitting on the curb, he came over and plopped heavily down next to me. "You okay?" he asked, peering at me with concern. "Yes, sorry, I was just a little unsteady for a moment, and one of the medics told me to take a seat. I can follow you somewhere else if you need me to," I asked. He started to shake his head and then glanced down the street as the neighbors still staring at us. "Small towns," I said with a little laugh. He nodded and said, "Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to sit elsewhere. It's kind of distracting having an audience. Do you think they'd freak too much if you were to sit in the police cruiser?" I shook my head. Not as long as you didn't put handcuffs on me and shove me in the back seat." He chuckled. "Don't think there's any danger of that, at least not right now. Murderers don't usually call their crimes in, although I'll be sure to keep an eye on you." We settled into the cruiser, and he turned on the car to let the air condition run. He was definitely running too hot. With the exertion of running to the backyard and the stress of what he found, he cranked up the AC all the way. "First off," he said, sticking out his head, "I'm Burton Edison, your new police chief. I don't think we've met before." I clasped his hand. "Anne Beckett. I'm a librarian." He nodded and continued, "Good to meet you, Anne. Could you tell me what happened and your connection with the victim?" He glanced at his notebook. "One of the firemen identified him as Roger Walton. Is that correct?" I nodded. That's right. At least I assume that's correct. I wish I could give you more information. I've never even met Roger. I arrived about 5 or 6 minutes before calling you. I was at work all afternoon before going home to change. A neighbor of mine, Zelda Smith, and I spoke for a few moments there. I said hurriedly. If I needed an alibi, at least Zelda could prove herself useful. Roger was my blind date. We were set up by his great aunt, who was one of my patrons at the library. Roger didn't respond when I knocked and rang the bell, so I walked around the side of the house. Burton grunted. You probably could smell the grill, couldn't you? He was definitely sharp. I nodded at him. That's right. I wasn't sure what he'd planned for tonight, but when I smelled charcoal burning, I went around the side of the house, figuring he just couldn't hear me. That's when I found him. I tried to keep my voice steady. Burton jotted down some more notes in his notebook. That's got to be the worst blind date on record, he said, glancing up to wince sympathy. I gave a dry laugh. It is, although I've had a couple that rivaled it. My dating life has not been a particularly rewarding one. A car pulled up behind us and parked along the curb. A blonde woman in her 20s hopped out of the car, eyes narrow with concern at the sight of the ambulance and the police car Burton and I were sitting in. She strode up to us. Burton unfolded himself from the car and stepped out. Something I can help you with, ma'am? He asked politely. Yes, she said in a rough voice. You can tell me what's going on here. Why are there police cars and ambulances? Bert tilted his head to one side and then extended his hand. I'm Burton Edison, the new Whitby police chief. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. I'm Heather Walton, the young woman answered impatiently, pushing a strand of blonde hair out of her eyes. My brother lives here. Burton took a deep breath, stood up and got out of the police car. Here, I said, I shouldn't be hogging the seat. In fact, I just wanted to get out of there, especially as a family member was being informed of a tragedy. Burton seemed to sense I was edging myself away. If you could stick around nearby, Anne, that would be great. I may need to speak with you some more. Back to my brother? Asked Heather impatiently. Mr. Burton said, would you happen to have a picture of your brother, of Roger? Heather sighed and whipped out her phone, flipping through the gallery before showing the police chief a photo. He nodded slowly. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but Roger is dead. He's been stabbed, said Burton, enunciating the words carefully as if to be as clear as possible. Heather gasped, covering her mouth with one hand. I walked away a bit, careful not to walk too far away since Burton had made a point about wanting to speak with me again. Burton spoke to Heather for a while as the sun started setting. Before long, other cars pulled up and I found the state police, the SBI, had arrived. I guess Whitby was too small to have any sort of forensic department or to be outfitted with what they needed for a murder investigation. The SBI asked me the same questions Burton had. While I was in between questioning, Heather walked up to me and gave a tight smile. I have a terrible feeling that I should know you, but I just can't place you. Were you dating Roger? Clearly, Roger hadn't confided in his sister, but then there were probably plenty of brothers who wouldn't. I said, I'm so sorry about your brother. We weren't dating, but we did have our first date scheduled for tonight, and that's why I was here. I'm Anne Beckett. I've seen you at the library. That's where I work. Heather nodded. Thanks. It's terrible realizing you recognize someone but not knowing from where. Of course I know you from the library. I see you there every single week. Well, when you're used to seeing someone only at a particular place and then they're not there, it can be tough to place them, I said. I hesitated and then said, again, I'm so sorry about your brother. This must be a terrible shock for you. Tears welled up in Heather's eyes and she impatiently rubbed them away. Sorry, Roger and I were close and I can't seem to wrap my head around the fact that he is gone. Were you coming by for a visit? I asked sympathetically. If so, it would be better that I found Roger than having his sister discover his body. She hesitated, more like driving past. I'd been running errands this evening, just trying to get caught up. I've been at the pharmacy and gassed up the car and was on my way to the grocery store when I saw the emergency vehicles. I just wanted to find out what was going on. I said, that must have been really scary to see it and to realize it was at your brother's house. Heather nodded and then rubbed impatiently at her eyes. Not as scary as what happened to you. The chief told me what happened. So you walked around the side of the house to see why he wasn't answering the door and then you found him? I nodded and tried for a matter-of-fact voice, even though I felt a telltale tremor trying to work its way in. That's right. Although I didn't know Roger, I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to even meet him. He sounds like he was a great brother. A cloud passed across her eyes and Heather turned away for a second to look at the house. I said again, I'm so sorry. It just seems so crazy. Heather said slowly, "It does seem crazy. I can't believe it's happened. Whitby isn't the kind of town where murders happen." It wasn't even a random break-in, the chief said after a brief inspection. It didn't look as if anything was out of place in the house. There weren't any drawers pulled out or papers on the floor or signs someone had been rushed to search the house. Would they be able to tell from that? "I think that a man living on his own might have a few drawers pulled out or cabinets open or whatever," I said. "The single man might be a little sloppy." Heather shook her head. "Maybe most men, but not my brother. He kept everything as neat as a pin. He always cleaned up after himself." I don't think I'd ever been over there and even seen as much as a coffee cup in the sink, but you're right, the police can't really tell until I go inside and have a look. That might be later or might be tomorrow because he said they have to treat the house like a crime scene right now. Her voice trailed off at the words and a sad expression crossed her face. "That's awful. I'm so sorry you have to go through that," I said. "It's awful, but I want to help them find out who did it. After all, if it's not a robbery gone wrong, it sounds like it must be someone he knows, someone with a grudge. And there's only one person that I can think of off the top of my head who might have one. A woman named Mary Hughes. Is she a neighbor of his? Something like that? Maybe a neighbor. We're just on my brain because they were still out in their yard gasping at us. I wouldn't be so surprised if they started pulling out yard chairs and eating popcorn." "No, Mary was a former coworker of Roger's," said Heather. "You know, I never even knew what Roger did for a living," I said. "That was one of the things we would have been talking about this evening. He was an investment banker. Not maybe the most fascinating of jobs to discuss on a first date," said Heather with a short laugh. "He'd been in that field since he got out of college. He counseled people on their stocks and bonds and helped people plan for retirement and stuff. Anyway, he and Mary didn't get along somehow. Roger had told me she had been passed over for a promotion a few weeks ago. He'd received it instead." I said, "Well, that's just the way things go on an office. After all, not everyone can get a promotion or you'd have an office full of managers." "That's true, but from what I heard, she took it very personally. Mary thought she was more qualified to get the promotion than Roger was, and she was really vocal about it. She made things very uncomfortable for Roger at the office every day," said Heather. "I can only imagine. It would be awful to have to go into work and see someone who is bitterly angry at you all the time." Heather added, "Then Mary was suddenly let go. You know how offices are. Anyway, she somehow acted like she thought Roger was at fault for that too, according to Roger, anyway." "You should make sure to let the police know," I said carefully. Heather stared at me. "You don't think Mary could have killed Roger, do you? Just for being upset about something that happened at work?" "I have no idea. I don't know Mary. But I think it sounds like something the police would like to know about," I said. "Where is Mary working now?" Heather made a face. "That's part of the problem. She apparently is having trouble getting back on her feet. She has a job at the tanning salon. I mean, I don't know Mary, but I've seen her walk in there when I drive by. Of course, there's nothing wrong with working there, but after she had this very professional job, it just seems like it wasn't the best choice for her. Plus the fact that she never really has a tan. The last time I saw her at the grocery store a few weeks ago, she was pale as usual, as pale as me," she said with a snort. She paused. "Roger told me she'd been drinking a lot too. It was almost like what happened to Mary at the office started her down this slippery slope." We were quiet for a few minutes before Heather said in a more cheerful tone, "I do need to get back over to the library. I always have a book to read, and in the past few months I haven't, and it's been the weirdest feeling. And now maybe I need something to distract me from all of this." I nodded. "I'm like you. I have a weird feeling when I don't have a book I'm reading. Ordinarily, I'm trying to read 2 books at once, so I don't usually have that problem." Heather made a face. "I'd be totally confused if I tried to do that. I'd mix up the characters between the books or something." "I'd probably do the same if the books were really similar. It only works well because I picked 2 totally different books. One will be a novel, one will be a biography, for instance." "What kind of books do you like to read?" I asked. "Oh, I'll read anything I've heard is good, but especially reading like mysteries," said Heather. She winced and gave a short laugh. "Maybe I need to try something different since I seem to be caught up in a murder mystery in real life." I said, "You could, although I do know a really fun murder mystery that you should still manage to be an escape. Try The Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz." She smiled. "Thanks for that. I'll run by the library soon." A few minutes later, Burton pulled me aside to ask me a few more questions with particulars of my movements before arriving at Roger's house, how long I'd waited at the door, and what I'd noticed when I walked around the back. Before I left, he added, "You said you work at the library. I nodded. I'm there most days. I'm actually not supposed to be working as many hours as I am, but I love it there. Burton said slowly. The thing is, I'm obviously very new in town. I'm guessing you aren't. I've been in Whitby almost, or I've been in Whitby. Is it Whitby or Whitby? I've been in Whitby most of my life, I answered. Burton said, how about if I bounce some ideas off of you sometime? Nothing official, he said in a rush, but I'd like to get your perspective on the town and its residents from time to time. You're probably acquainted with a lot of folks with your job at the library. You have the kind of info that could be valuable for me. I don't want to tread on any toes, but with a big case like this, and my first really high visible one here in town. I smiled at him. That sounds like a great idea. I appreciate how sensitive you are about being new here. Well, I just don't want to go trampling in. I know small towns can be a little mistrustful of newcomers. How about your deputy? Does he know many people in town, I asked? He rolled his eyes. Let's just say he's pretty antisocial. He keeps to himself, as a matter of fact. I might know more people in town than he does. I suddenly remembered something. Actually, you could help me with something. I know you won't have a lot of time while you're working on this case, but I recently held a survey to see what programs adults might be interested in at the library. One of the most requested things was a self-defense class. Burton raised his eyebrows at this. In Whitby? I wouldn't have thought there was a lot of need for that here. My smile was a little more strained this time. Actually, it was a suggestion I threw out there, so maybe the survey results were a little less than scientific. Burton gave me an appraising look. You're worried about your own safety? I get that you work in a public place, but so far Whitby has seemed pretty quiet. I took a deep breath. It's probably a result of my backstory. I was raised by my great aunt here in Whitby because I lost my mother when I was 8. She lived in Charleston then, and it was really early to realize the world wasn't a safe place after all. I shivered, still remembering the months of nightmares I'd had after my mother's death and the kindness of my aunt when that happened. Burton nodded slowly. I'm so sorry. Of course that's going to affect the way you see the world, and I'd be happy to give the class. Actually, it'd be a good way for me to meet some more residents, so the sooner the better. I'll get it set up, I said. We might not have a lot of time to get the word out, but if I scheduled some posts on social media, we could still get a good group. So that was the second chapter of Checked Out by Elizabeth Spain Craig, The Village Library Mysteries. How do you want to say the town? Is it Whitby or is it Whitby? Let me know. How do you say it? Because I'm not quite sure how to say it. That's the cool thing and the sad thing about reading is if you read a lot but you don't actually hear the words out loud like in an audiobook, you put your own way that you say them in it. I hope that you guys liked the first 2 chapters, that you're going to go and get this book on Amazon and read it along with us and meet on the last Wednesday of the month on my channel here in October. I'll put the little picture up right here. So thank you so much. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, happy reading. Bye.